Welcome back to Introduction to Computer Science at SSFS. In this unit, we're going to take a look at functions in more depth. Remember, we examined functions in the unit on Turtle. Functions are a great way to simplify your code, especially when you're repeating a series of tasks. It's also a great way to break your code up into much more readable sections, with each function having its own purpose. In this lesson, we're going to talk about defining a simple function, how to call a function, and then how to document it. So let's first of all talk about how you actually write a function. So let's do that in PyCharm. I'm going to go back to PyCharm, and you can see I've created a new file called functions.py, and we'll use this to demonstrate functions. So when I'm ready to define a function, I type the keyword def, and that means define. And then I'm going to give the function a name, and a couple things to remember when naming a function. First of all, naming a function follows the same rules as with variables. So that means you always want to start it with a lowercase letter. It should always be one word, and your function name should be as descriptive as possible. It should describe what the function does. And if you have to use multiple words, then you can either separate those words with underscores or use camel case. In this video, I'll be using camel case. So I'm going to create a simple function just for demonstration purposes that's going to print something to the screen. So it's actually going to print spam a lot. Okay, so that's the title of my function. And again, it's okay to make your function name long, because as you'll see, most major programs that you write code in are going to auto-complete that function for you. So we'll see that in a minute. Function also has to have parentheses after the name. In this instance, there's nothing in the parentheses. In an upcoming lesson, we'll talk about what can go inside the parentheses. And the last part of a function line is a colon. Colon always goes to the end. Then I'm going to hit return. And notice that the cursor is indented, and that's how Python knows that lines are part of a function. If they're indented, it knows they're part of the function above it. So my function is just going to print spam, 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 eggs, and spam. That's all my function does. It's not a very exciting function. Okay, so I've made a function. It's going to print spam a lot, spam, 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 eggs, and spam. Let's go ahead and run that function. And it finished, but nothing printed. And that's because I never told my function to run, never told it to operate. So how do I do that? Well, all you have to do to call a function or to get a function to run is write the name of it. So if I write print, and you can see that as I start writing PRI, it suggests the name of my function. So if I hit enter, it fills it in for me. And again, that's why it's easier to have longer names, because you're going to end up not having to type it in that many times. So now let's go ahead and run that function. And you can see it printed spam, 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 eggs, and spam. If I wanted to do that twice, I could print spam a lot again. I'm calling the function again. When I hit run, it prints it twice. Okay? One time for each function call. One thing to be careful of, though, that the function call has to come after you define the function. So if I go ahead and write above the function print spam a lot, it auto-completes it. But first of all, notice my program is giving me an error. It almost looks like a spell check error with a red underline. And it's saying unresolved reference. Let's go ahead and run it anyway just to see what happens. And it says name print spam a lot is not defined. That's because when Python runs, it starts at the top and executes code from the top down. So it sees the function called a print spam a lot, but it has no idea what that function is, because it doesn't read the whole thing then run it. So you always have to put your function calls after your function definition. The final thing we're going to talk about is how to document a function. And you remember that a comment is a number sign. So I could put a comment after this. This is a function call. And it's also important to document your functions, but we do it a slightly different way. We use something called a document string, and sometimes it's abbreviated docstring, and you'll see docstring probably more often. So I'm going to put in my document string, and I always start it with 3 quotes. 1, 2, 3, and as soon as I start typing, it puts in this return statement. I'll get rid of that, and I'll just type a comment. This function prints a line about spam. And again, while that seems pretty self-explanatory, what some programs do is it'll read these document strings and it will provide pop-up tips for users of your function. So if you're creating a function for someone who's going to use this in their code, the documentation really helps to tell what your function does exactly. So all of your functions for this class must have a document string, even if they're simple functions. In the next video, we'll start talking about how to get information to your function from your program.